Okay, so I think this is the last file from me for now. So this is a talk about the structure, and I've changed my mind a lot about this since last week when I first started playing with it. Specifically, the timings given to different aspects and also the aspects themselves. So this is where we are currently, but it could change, and it could change because you want it to change, or it might change because I think it should change. So it's certainly in flux, and I think that's a good thing. So at 9:25 a.m., that is the time that I would like the attendees to be asked to arrive by. I think it's important that people, if they are going to participate in the training, should arrive no later than 9:50 a.m. I think the way that I'm structuring this and the way that I'd like to facilitate it really means that people have to be there no later than 9:50 a.m. And would need to stay for the duration of the training. I don't think it works if people are going to arrive late, and it certainly wouldn't work if people are going to leave early. I think that's a very important condition. So from 9:30 to 10 a.m, we wouldn't have a formal warm-up. It's not a drama workshop, and we don't want people to feel uncomfortable. But we'll start with the tea and the coffee, and participants would be encouraged to meet and greet each other, and it would be my role and the role of anyone else who's facilitating at the time, maybe Sarah and Jess if they were able to help, to get the conversations going and to make sure that they're guided to an informal conversation about what we hope to achieve in the time that we're spending together today. But it would be our jobs to make sure that people are really talking and networking, and we're moving that forward. Within the time, each participant would also be asked to have their photo taken if they're happy with that. If they don't want it, then of course that's absolutely fine. The reason why I would like a picture is so that that could go on the Facebook page, the virtual learning space, along with their name and maybe a little information about the organisation that they're representing, so that we have a visual archive of who's attended, and that will help with future connections. It's a lot more comfortable and I think a lot more easier if we have faces rather than just names or just titles. So it's about trying to have that sort of hearts and minds approach to make people really reach out and to put a face onto some quite complex ideas. In that first 30 minutes, the participants would also be asked to think, casually though, only in their own heads, about how they would describe themselves and their work, their reason for their work, and their personal milestones within their practice. This would be for them to think about while we're having tea and coffee and so on and so forth. They'd also be asked to think about why they're attending the training and what they hope to achieve from it. These items would be shared with the group later on in the training, but really in this first 30 minutes we just introduced the ideas so that people have had a little time to let it digest in the back of their heads, so that they feel maybe a little bit more comfortable later on when they're actually asked to discuss it. Then from 10 a.m. to 10:15, before we do formal introductions, we'd spend some time considering why we're here, what we hope to achieve. I would have also asked participants to think about this prior to their arrival, for those who've engaged with the email from me. And they'll be invited to note down any items as soon as they're there on the paper roll, things that they might want to draw our attention to later. So the aims for the day could be very personal, they could be very general, or they could be very important to them. They might also be more casual and less considered points that they just wish to explore and to see where they might go. So participants would be invited to share this out loud or to write it down on the paper roll with the rest of the group. And we could look back at those aims throughout the duration of the training in order to attempt to tailor the work to the desires and interests that we actually have in the room. We'll also consider a little bit about what we hope won't happen in the training. I think that's a useful thing to discuss at the start of it as well, so that we can try and make sure that that doesn't happen. It also helps to create a sort of community charter of the things that we won't allow to happen and how we tackle them if they were to come up within the facilitation. We'll consider a little bit about what the participants must do in order to achieve the aims that they're bringing to the day. So, for example, if their purpose in attending was to network or make new partnerships, we'd simply articulate it to say, okay, it's important then that I, the participant, are going to engage with all the opportunities to meet each participant within the room and hear their story, for example. Basically, it's a simple exercise that's important to encourage participants to take responsibility for their desires within the training and ask them to immediately be active participants rather than to be unresponsive for the duration of the training. So this is really about just saying to them, okay, you've identified what you want to get out of today. I will now help you to achieve that. What do you need to do over the duration of the next 3 hours to achieve it? So as we've already said, if they're here to make sure that they've got new network opportunities, then they need to just articulate in their own heads, it's my responsibility to be meeting people during the coffee breaks, before, during and after, and so on and so forth. I'd also set an activity at this point where I give people an envelope and a piece of paper, and they write their address on the envelope. We place a stamp on it. And on the sheet of paper, they ask themselves, they write it down, the thing or things that they wish to do differently upon returning to their organisations as a result of completing the training. So a personal goal or a milestone that they wish to achieve in the coming days or weeks, possibly months, but something that's very personal for them. It's not to be said out loud, it's not even to be shared at this point, it's purely to go down on the paper for them. Once they've done that, it gets put to one side, and we'll come back to it later in the training. It is important to note that this part of the training can overrun, but I think it's important for the community to bond at this point, to learn a little more about each other, and really to set their own aspirations for the day, because I really see the training, the facilitation as the starting point. It's about how they change their behaviours in order to create change within their communities. And that's what I'm trying to really get at here with this. I think it's a very important place to start. From 10:15 to 10:20, we just set down the foundations for the training. So any rules we want to bring into the space, for example, how we use electronic devices, methods of interaction, how we deal with the potential for disagreement within our conversations. Some very simple ground rules, basically, that we wish as a community to abide by. And of course, if there's anything that the Arbor wishes to introduce here, then we could make sure that's put in prior to starting the day. 10:20 to 10:30, introduction to the outcomes as set out by the training facilitators. Here we'll start to build some bridges between what the participants have already said they want to achieve within the day and what we believe we're going to achieve within the day. So hopefully we'll find some ways that those things happily collide together to help make sense of how they can engage with what it is that we're actually going to do. 10:35 to 10:40, how to interact with the space. So just some basic introductions to the different modes and methods that we'll have in the room, such as the paper roll or virtual space. And then from 10:45 to 10:55, we'll freshen up our coffee cups. Not have a formal break, but just have a moment where people can, have a little chat without the structured environment, where they can start to share their initial thoughts, having had this discussion and learnt a bit more about why they're there and each other's there, as well as what we want them to get out of the day. And it's just that first chance for the networking to take place perhaps in a more structured way, now that they know a little bit more about each other. Then at 10:55 to 11:55, we come back together. We spend that hour to share our stories, who we are, why we're here, the problems we face within our organisations, reflections upon our leadership journeys, and the collection of milestones from participants to share those kind of experiences. We'll think about how we are generating change, what was our driver to start working in this area, going back to the idea of passion. We'll think about who it is that we work with, what is it that affects our work, and what effect does our work have upon the communities that we engage with. We'll think about difficulties that we've experienced and how this might be overcome or has been overcome. We'll hopefully start to see some similar stories emerging from the participants, or we'll start to see some people who've experienced a particular problem and maybe somebody else has found a way to overcome it. We'll look at some examples of our projects and some examples of the impact of our projects. Then at 11:55 to 12:05, we'll look at some definitions of leadership, community, success, inspiration, change, empowerment, action, voice, and the initial sharing of good practice and research, building upon what we've talked about before. We might look at some reading, we might look at some video clips, so on and so forth, to help offer new definitions for these words. I realise it's not a huge amount of time allocated to quite a big subject, but we're just having to think about where we move on. 12:05 to 12:10 we'll take a rest. 12:10 to 12:40 we'll do the change exercise. So depending upon the number of people